what have I got? What do you want me to say? And this fella had taken liking to me from the stories I've told. He said, no, you just come in and just say what you're saying to me right now and just tell them stories.
Ernest Borgnine lived the kind of life that sounds made up until proven right. He brutalized Frank Sinatra on camera, won an Academy Award the very next year, hunted German U-boats during World War II, and yet at one time couldn't stay married for more than 40 days. He kept acting well into his 90s, yet none of those experiences came close to the strangest stories he openly shared. So which moments from his life are the hardest to believe? Can we prove any of them? Stay with us as we explore the wildest stories and the most dangerous, unbelievable adventures of Ernest Borgnine. From the soldier to the villain. Before we get into how a man who spent World War II hunting submarines became an Oscar winner, there's major one thing about Borgnine's life that still sounds impossible. Before joining the Navy, the man we mostly remember today as Ernest Borgnine was born as Ernest Borgnine in January 1917 in Hamden, Connecticut, to Italian immigrant parents. As a child, he spent some time living in Italy before his family moved back to Connecticut. By the time he finished high school in 1935, he had no real plan, no big dream, and no idea what he wanted to do with his life. So he did what many young men without direction did back then, and so he joined the Navy. And as we'll see, that choice would change his life forever. Now, under the Navy, Borgnine would serve as a gunner's mate through all of World War II. His job during this difficult time was quite simple but dangerous. Guard the Atlantic Ocean against German submarines while still supporting the USS Lamberton. As he'd later reveal, some of his strongest appearances on the big screen weren't him trying to look tough, but a conscious effort to relive those frightening years of his life. He served in the Navy that way for 10 years, beginning from 1935 up until 1945. And by the time he left the Navy, he had earned 2 Navy Good Conduct Medals, along with honors for the American Defense Service, the American Campaign, and the World War II Victory Medal. Years later, Borgnine was also given the honorary rank of Chief Petty Officer, an honor he was said to value just as much as any of the awards he won in Hollywood. Thankfully for him, he'd managed to return home after the war was over without any major injuries, but he also came home without a clear future in mind. For a while, Borgnine drifted through life after the war, to the point where life almost felt depressing. He tried out different jobs, but none of them felt right. Then one day, while his mother watched him struggle one last time, she gave him one simple piece of advice that changed everything. And what was the advice? Before we get to that, please consider liking and subscribing for more deep dives into the real lives behind Hollywood's most unforgettable faces. Okay, so to put his mother's advice frankly, she told him to try acting. It sounds almost too simple to believe. Little did he know that his mother's suggestion would turn into a career that lasted more than 60 years. Borgnine used the GI Bill to attend drama school, and by the late 1940s, he was acting in summer shows and local theaters, slowly learning how to be a more polished actor. His first big stage success came in Tennessee Williams's The Glass Menagerie, and that performance helped him gain respect in Hollywood. Once he arrived in the movie business, his face and looks would start to do most of the heavy lifting, despite his great talent and skill on camera. For one, Borgnine was short and strong, with a gap-toothed smile and a rough voice that sounded like gravel. So many casting directors looked at him and decided he was perfect for playing villains. Some thought it was a bad idea, but they would be in for a huge surprise. And that surprising moment came in 1953, when that decision paid off in his performance as Staff Sergeant Fatso Judson in From Here to Eternity. In this, he was a cruel bully who beat Frank Sinatra's character and later ended his life. Reviews later on showed how much audiences hated his character, but for an actor, what that also meant was that Borgnine had done his job perfectly. As a result, the movie would become a huge success, and many would see his frightening performance as the reason why. Yet that wasn't all. As it turned out, while filming From Here to Eternity, Borgnine worked closely with Frank Sinatra, who played Private Angelo Maggio. Off camera, the two men reportedly got along well. But on camera, Borgnine had to beat Sinatra's character so convincingly that the scenes became some of the hardest work of his career. They filmed the fight again and again until the director got exactly what he wanted. It was painful, exhausting work that most people never think about when they imagine old Hollywood, but it showed just how committed Borgnine was to every role. For most actors, playing such a great villain would have locked them into those roles forever. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. He scared Joan Crawford in Johnny Guitar in 1954, played another tough fighter in Veracruz that same year, and later became a cruel bully in Violent Saturday. Before long, Hollywood saw him as the man you hired whenever you needed a dangerous bad guy. And this wasn't even the strangest part of Borgnine's life. Years later, he would marry one of Broadway's biggest legends, only for the marriage to become one of Hollywood's shortest. But before that happened, he first had to escape the role Hollywood thought he was trapped in forever. You see, for a while, it looked like playing the bully and the bad guy would be his future. But then, something very interesting happened. Something that nobody, especially Borgnine himself, had ever expected. The big moment came in 1955 when director Delbert Mann was casting a small, low-budget movie called Marty. It was based on a TV story by Paddy Chayefsky, following a lonely butcher from the Bronx who believed he would never find love until he met a woman who felt just as alone. The role was the complete opposite of everything Borgnine had become famous for. There was no fighting, no anger, and no fear. For this once, he was a kind and quiet man, hoping someone would finally love him the same way he cared for others. Borgnine later said he knew almost right away that he had impressed Mann and Chayefsky during the audition. Even so, nobody could have guessed what happened next. Marty became a huge hit. Critics who only knew Borgnine as a movie villain were amazed by how gentle and honest he was in the role. One famous review said he mixed roughness with kindness, and that became the heart of the movie. Marty would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, and Ernest Borgnine, the man Hollywood had treated like a villain just 2 years earlier, had now won the Oscar for Best Actor. Grace Kelly handed him the award, and it was the only Oscar nomination of his career, as well as the most surprising yet beloved wins in Academy Awards history. Now let's get to the big part that doesn't make sense. From the villain to the hopeless romantic. After Marty's groundbreaking success, some critics started concluding made-up clues that Borgnine's personal life must secretly be lonely and awkward, just like the man he played. Maybe it was because he was too good in the role, and for that reason, they believed he had used his own hidden feelings to make the role seem so real. Borgnine strongly disagreed, openly telling reporters that while he wasn't a playboy, he was also not the man they framed him to be. He seemed determined to make it clear he didn't like people thinking his real life was as sad as Marty's. He confidently asserted he wasn't shy or awkward, and he certainly had no trouble getting attention from women. Speaking of which, over the next 10 years, Ernest Borgnine's love life would become almost the complete opposite of Marty's on screen. And this feat would lead to one of Hollywood's most famous marriages among celebrities. But the results were beyond absurd. You see, by the early 1960s, Borgnine had already been married and divorced twice, first to Rhoda Kemmons, and then got into a relationship with Mexican actress Katy Jurado before they got married as well. But then again, the relationship didn't last. And by November 1963, soon after his divorce from Jurado became official, he met Ethel Merman, the Broadway star who was famous for her performance in shows like Anything Goes and Gypsy. On paper, they seemed like a strange match. Merman was a glamorous stage superstar from New York, while Borgnine was a rough, working-class movie actor. But people close to them said they liked each other right away. Merman later told reporters she had never truly been in love before, and that, for the first time in her life, she felt safe. Things seemed to be going pretty well for them. So after dating for about 6 months, they got married on June 27, 1964. It was all sunshine and rainbows at the wedding. Yet what happened next became one of the shortest and most famous marriages in Hollywood history. When the couple went on their honeymoon, the problem started almost right away. Borgnine later said the biggest issue was simple. Wherever they traveled, people recognized him everywhere they went, but very few recognized Merman, even though she was one of Broadway's biggest stars. It hurt her deeply, and the marriage never recovered. Just 32 days after the wedding, they separated, and their divorce became open and official that November, though Merman hardly shared any details about what happened. However, she did leave behind one unforgettable joke. Years later, when she wrote her autobiography, she included a chapter called My Marriage to Ernest Borgnine. The chapter was one completely blank page. It became one of the funniest and sharpest jokes ever put in print at the time, turning a painful breakup into a story people still remember today. As for Borgnine, he never spoke about the marriage with anger or spite, and in later interviews he simply said that everyone knew him, but hardly anyone outside America seemed to know Ethel, and that difference slowly hurt their relationship in a way they couldn't fix. It was a sad story hidden inside a famous joke. Two talented stars, both used to being the center of attention, learned they couldn't share the spotlight without one of them getting hurt. And somehow, it didn't stop there. After that, union crashed and burned. Borgnine married 2 more times. First came Donna Rancourt, whose marriage lasted from 1965 to 1972 and gave him one of his 4 children. After that, by 1974, he'd met and married Tova Tresnas. To his credit, that marriage would last for the rest of his life, almost 40 years, until he tragically passed away in 2012. After 4 marriages ended in divorce, Borgnine finally found the lasting love he'd been searching for, proving that even the man most famous for playing a lonely bachelor eventually found his happy ending. The career that never stopped growing, while his personal life was always making the news. At the peak of the marriage situation, Borgnine's career was about to take another big turn, and this one would introduce him to a whole new generation. In 1962, he took the lead role in a new TV comedy called McHale's Navy, where he played Lieutenant Commander Quentin McHale. His character was the quick-talking, rule-breaking captain of a PT boat crew in the South Pacific during World War II. For a man who had really served in the Navy during the war, the role came full circle. Now, he was no longer watching for enemy submarines in the Atlantic, but was now using his previous fears to make Americans laugh every week by playing a funny version of the life he had once lived. McHale's Navy made Borgnine a household name in a way his movies never had. He was no longer just the villain from From Here to Eternity or the kind butcher from Marty. Now, he had evolved into the funny captain that families welcomed into their homes every week. The show lasted 4 seasons and proved he was one of the most talented actors of his time. It was unbelievable enough that he was a perfect villain as well as a passionate lover, except now he could also scare people, make them cry, or make them laugh with equal skill. The massive work on his table during this time was a far cry from the unemployment he dealt with not too long ago. He didn't stop there, though, and during the 60s and 70s, Borgnine kept appearing in some of the biggest movies of the time. He starred in The Dirty Dozen, one of the decade's biggest war films. By 1969, he joined Sam Peckinpah's groundbreaking western The Wild Bunch, a movie that changed how action scenes were filmed and is still studied in film schools today. In 1972, he starred in the disaster hit The Poseidon Adventure, playing a tough New York police officer trying to lead survivors out of an overturned ship. The role introduced him to another generation that had never seen his earlier work. He later appeared in the science fiction movie Escape from New York in 1981, proving once again that he could fit into almost any kind of story. Very few actors of his time worked in so many different genres, and even fewer of them gave great performances in nearly all of them, or got high praise. What made Borgnine special wasn't only his talent, but his youthful refusal to slow down. Most actors begin stepping away from the spotlight once they reach their 60s or 70s. But for Borgnine, as we'll see, he would do the opposite. In 1996, he narrated the strange fantasy movie Merlin's Shop of Mystical Wonders, which later became famous after being joked about on Mystery Science Theater 3000. That same year, while in his late 70s, he climbed onto a bus and traveled across America just to meet his fans and visit the country he loved. The trip later became its own documentary. He also spent a year serving as chairman of the National Salute to Hospitalized Veterans, visiting patients in VA hospitals across the country, a cause that meant a great deal to a man who had served during World War II. His ability to reinvent himself never ended. In the 1980s, a whole new generation met him as Dominic Santini, the wise mechanic and mentor on the action show Airwolf. Then, years later, even younger fans came to know only his voice when he became Mermaid Man on SpongeBob SquarePants. an aging superhero who refused to give up even as he grew older. In many ways, Borgnine was playing a cartoon version of himself as a man who had every reason to retire but simply chose to keep going. Think about that career for a moment. A man who once fought German submarines during World War II later became the voice of a cartoon superhero for children who had no idea he had ever done anything else. They didn't know he had once played a killer beside Frank Sinatra, a lonely butcher who won an Oscar, or a funny Navy captain leading his crew every week on television. Very few actors have reached so many different audiences over so many decades, with each generation knowing a completely different side of the same man. It's believed by fans that this kind of success wasn't luck. People who worked with Borgnine said he treated every role, no matter how small, with the same care he gave Marty. He never worried about protecting his image. He didn't care if a role made him look tough, foolish, evil, or kind, as long as it felt honest. That attitude is reportedly one reason directors kept hiring him well into his 80s and 90s, long after many actors from his generation had disappeared from Hollywood. He simply never stopped being available to help, even when that meant readjusting the many things he'd become known for. The legend who never quit. As we'll see, Borgnine's energy didn't stop when the cameras turned off. You could say the old guy just couldn't quit. As we've seen, even in 1996, while he was in his late 70s, he climbed onto a bus with no movie to promote and no studio telling him where to go. He simply wanted to travel across America and meet the fans who had supported him for decades. He visited small towns, local diners, and roadside stops that most celebrities would never think about visiting. The journey became a 1997 documentary called Ernest Borgnine on the Bus. It was a different kind of victory lap. Instead of staying home and letting his old movies speak for him, Borgnine wanted to shake hands with the people who had spent half a century watching him on screen. He carried that same generosity into his charity work. Borgnine served a full year as chairman of the National Salute to Hospitalized Veterans, personally visiting patients at Department of Veterans Affairs medical centers across the country. He also volunteered as the national spokesman for Stories of Service, urging his fellow World War II veterans to come forward and share their own experiences before those stories were lost. This was a lot for a man who rarely spoke publicly about the specifics of his own wartime service, but served as a respectful and consistent way of honoring the men he had served alongside, long after the uniforms had come off and the medals had been packed away. Even into his 90s, Borgnine kept working. He never once talked about retirement in interviews the way most actors his age did. In 2009, at the age of 92, he appeared in a guest role on the medical drama ER, earning an Emmy nomination for the performance, a nomination that stunned people who assumed his best work was decades behind him. In 2010, at 93 years old, the Screen Actors Guild honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, with the organization's president praising his boundless energy and remarkable body of work. Work that by that point spanned more than 200 film and television credits across every genre imaginable. That same year, he appeared alongside Bruce Willis, Helen Mirren, and Morgan Freeman in the action film Red, proof that even in his 90s, directors were still eager to put him on screen and audiences were still eager to see him there. Ernest Borgnine died on July 8, 2012, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles from renal failure. He was 95 years old. His family said he had been in excellent health right up until a sudden final illness, and his longtime spokesman confirmed he was surrounded by loved ones at the end. He was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Los Angeles, alongside so many of the other legendary names of the industry he had spent his entire adult life working in. It capped a career that had run for more than 60 years without ever really slowing down, from wartime sailor to Broadway husband to Oscar winner to cartoon icon, a life so strange and varied like fiction, most people would call it unbelievable. The tributes that followed his passing made clear just how widely his career had touched people. He was remembered simultaneously as a war hero, a beloved sitcom star, an Oscar-winning dramatic actor, and a children's cartoon voice, categories that almost never overlap in a single person's obituary. Even now, more than a decade after his passing, his presence keeps resurfacing in unexpected places. A recent episode of the British science fiction series Doctor Who included a playful line of dialogue suggesting Borgnine was somehow still alive due to a time glitch, a joke that only works because his legacy still feels so alive in pop culture. It's a strange kind of immortality for a man who started his adult life standing watch on a Navy ship, half a world away from anything resembling a spotlight. That's the strange, layered truth about Ernest Borgnine. He wasn't simply a tough guy in a war movie, and he wasn't simply the tender-hearted butcher in Marty either. He was a real sailor who survived a real war, a man whose 32-day marriage to one of Broadway's biggest stars became one of the most quoted heartbreaks in Hollywood history, and an actor who never stopped chasing new audiences, right down to voicing a children's cartoon in his 80s. His story is a reminder that a single suggestion from a mother who simply told her restless son to try acting can end up rewriting the next 60 years of a different life. That is the unbelievable story of Ernest Borgnine's life, the man who had seen the worst life had to offer, but always smiled gracefully. If any of these stories caught you off guard, let us know which one surprised you most in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the real lives behind Hollywood's most unforgettable faces, subscribe and stick around. There's always another story worth telling, and we'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Until next time, dear viewer, take care.